All right, so today we're going to be doing a deep dive on something pretty interesting.
Okay.
Um, Joe Rogan's response to all that criticism he got for being at Donald Trump's inauguration.
Yeah.
Some of you might be thinking, like, wasn't that forever ago?
Wow.
And yeah, it kind of was. But the thing is, his reaction, that whole get your life right, stop worrying about mine thing,
Oh, yeah.
it just keeps coming up.
It's a good line.
It is. It's a good line. It really struck a nerve with a lot of people, and I don't think it was always a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're going to be looking at today, why that is, and maybe what it says about how we handle criticism in this whole crazy online world we're living in.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that it wasn't just like a random tweet or something,
Right.
His podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, is huge. Millions of listeners.
Oh, yeah.
One of the biggest voices out there. So when he says something, especially something that blunt, it really makes an impact.
Yeah, I've listened to a few of his episodes myself, and he's definitely not afraid to talk about things that are a little controversial, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He has a very no-holds-barred approach, and he interviews all kinds of people.
Yeah.
Scientists, athletes, even politicians from all different sides.
Mm-hmm.
So some people seeing him at Trump's inauguration with all this stuff surrounding Trump and his policies, it was seen as taken aside.
Right.
Even though Rogan might say that's not what he was doing at all.
Right.
And those articles you sent really show that divide.
Yeah.
Some people praise in Rogan for being open-minded, and others are really against him even being there.
So we've got this guy who's already seen as controversial, going to this event that's super politically charged, and then he drops this "get your life right" line on social media.
Yeah.
I mean, where do we even begin to unpack that?
Well, maybe before we look at that quote, it might be helpful to zoom out for a minute
Okay.
and think about how public figures react to criticism these days. Celebrities, even regular people with a decent following online.
Good point. I feel like a lot of times it's damage control, carefully worded apologies, or sometimes they just go totally on the defensive and start fighting back with the critics. Exactly.
true.
There's a whole playbook they follow. But Rogan, he seems to be throwing that playbook out the window. His response, it's not about smoothing things over or getting into it with anyone online. It's almost like he's saying, look, I'm doing my thing, you do yours, and that's that.
Yeah, I got to admit, there's a part of me that finds that kind of refreshing.
Right.
Like everyone gets sucked into these online arguments,
Right.
but he's just stepping aside and saying, nope, not doing it.
And that's where things get really interesting because it connects to this whole idea of personal responsibility. It's something Rogan talks about a lot on his show. He's really into self-improvement, taking ownership of your choices, and not letting all the outside noise distract you from your goals.
So is he basically using that same philosophy for how he deals with criticism?
It seems like it, yeah. It's like he's taking that self-reliance message and giving it to his audience, too.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, instead of focusing on what I'm doing, maybe look at your own life and see what you can improve. It's definitely a thought-provoking approach. It makes you think, for sure. But it brings up some questions, too, right?
Right.
Like, is it really that simple? Do we actually have that much control over our own lives, especially in a world that feels like it's getting crazier all the time? And what about the responsibility that comes with having a platform as big as Rogan's does, telling people to get their lives right, ignore all the bigger problems that are out of their control?
Yeah, definitely something to think about.
I feel like we're kind of dancing around the big issue here,
Okay.
which is like the whole political side of this whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Rogan being at Trump's inauguration, that's a political statement in itself, right?
Right.
And then that "get your life right" comment almost sounds like he's just dismissing any criticism about it. Like it's not even worth his time.
Yeah, you've hit on a really important point there.
Okay.
Because even though Rogan has all these different people on his show and says he doesn't follow any one political view,
Right.
just being at that inauguration puts him in a politically context, whether he likes it or not.
So is that irresponsible? I mean, he has this huge audience.
Yeah.
What he says can influence how people think, how they vote.
Right. And that's where we get into this tricky question about, like,
Yeah.
what are public figures supposed to do?
Yeah.
Are they obligated to use their platform to talk about politics?
Right.
Or can they stay neutral or even avoid politics completely?
It feels like there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
On one hand, you want people with influence to speak up against things that are wrong, use their platform for good.
Sure.
But then again, you also don't want to force anyone into taking a side they don't agree with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Rogan's approach so interesting.
Okay.
Because he's not saying, I'm staying out of politics.
Right.
He's doing something a lot more subtle.
Right.
He's shifting the focus away from all the external debates and onto how the individual feels inside.
So instead of arguing about Trump or politics in America.
Yeah.
He's saying, hey, focus on yourself, focus on what you can actually control.
Exactly. It's like a kind of disengagement from politics, but in a very individual way.
Yeah.
And it's a strategy that, whether you agree with it or not, has been super effective. He's built this huge following by tapping into that desire for self-improvement and personal growth.
Okay.
And by making himself seem like someone who's above all the political fighting.
It's like he's saying politics are messy and divisive. I'm not going to get caught up in all that. I'm going to focus on what really matters, helping people become better versions of themselves.
And that message really resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Especially these days when political discussions feel so toxic and pointless.
But isn't there a danger in that? Like, if everyone just focuses on themselves, who's going to deal with the bigger problems?
Right.
Who's going to fight for social justice and equality, all the stuff that needs everyone to work together?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something we all need to think about as a society.
Okay.
Because Rogan's approach, while it might be appealing on a personal level, does raise some concerns about whether people will get involved in their communities and take responsibility for each other.
So it's like he's offering a solution for how to feel good as a person,
Yeah.
but maybe not for how to make society better as a whole.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And it brings up another layer to this whole get your life right idea.
Okay.
Because while Rogan might say this advice applies to everyone, his own background and experiences really affect how that message comes across.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. Rogan is a wealthy white guy with a huge platform.
Right.
He has a level of privilege and security that most people don't.
Yeah.
He can kind of separate himself from certain realities that others can't ignore.
So for someone who's struggling to pay their bills or facing discrimination,
That's
telling
it.
them to just get their life right can sound pretty insensitive.
Exactly. And that's where the nuance gets lost. Because personal responsibility is definitely important. But it doesn't exist on its own. It's affected by all sorts of things like race, class, gender, all the social factors that shape our lives.
It feels like we're getting into some pretty deep stuff here.
Yeah.
But it's so important to talk about this stuff, right? Because Rogan's statement, it's not just about him. It's about how we as individuals and as a society deal with this complicated mix of personal growth, social responsibility, and the power of these big online platforms. Okay, so we've talked about Rogan, his response, all the politics of it. But I keep thinking about, like, what about us? What can we learn from all this?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to dealing with criticism.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because most of us, thankfully, don't have millions of people judging our every move.
Sure.
But we all get criticized sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
It's just part of life, whether it's your boss, a family member, or even that voice in your head.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to just ignore it.
Right.
Especially if it's coming from someone you care about.
Absolutely. And I think that's where Rogan's approach,
Yeah.
as harsh as it might sound, actually has something useful to teach us.
Okay.
He's not saying to ignore all feedback,
Right.
but don't let it control you.
Okay.
Focus on what you can change, your own actions, your own growth, and let the rest go.
So it's like he's drawn this line
Yeah,
between all that outside noise and your own inner peace.
exactly.
You can't always control what people say, but you can control how you react to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is where the connection to those ancient philosophies you mentioned
Okay.
really comes in, like Stoicism.
Yeah.
It's all about focusing on what you can control, accepting what you can't, and finding peace, even when things are chaotic. Rogan might not be quoting Marcus Aurelius or anything,
Right.
but it's the same basic idea.
So it's not just about ignoring criticism.
Right.
It's about choosing how you respond.
Exactly.
And building up that strength inside so you don't get dragged down by negativity.
And that takes practice. It's like a muscle you got to work out.
Yeah.
Our natural instinct when we feel attacked is to get defensive, to argue, try to prove the other person wrong.
Which never really works, does it?
Nope, it usually just makes things worse.
Yeah.
Everyone ends up feeling bad.
Right.
But if you can step back, take a breath,
Okay.
and ask yourself, is there any truth to this criticism? Is there something I can learn from it? And if not, let it go. Don't let it mess with your head.
Easier said than done, though.
Oh, for sure.
I can imagine someone saying something hurtful.
Yeah.
My first instinct is not going to be like, oh, thanks for the stoic wisdom.
Right. It's not about being perfect. It's about being aware.
Correct.
And sometimes the best thing you can do is just not engage at all. Just like Rogan. You choose to walk away from the drama and focus on your own thing.
Which brings us back to that question, what does getting your life right actually mean?
Yeah.
Is it all about personal growth,
Mm-hmm.
or is there a responsibility to society too?
That's the big question.
Mm.
And I think it's something each of us has to figure out for ourselves.
Okay.
There's no right answer for everyone. What works for Rogan might not work for someone else who's dealing with different problems.
So it's not about blindly following his advice.
Right.
It's about using it to think about our own values and how we want to live our lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Take that idea of self-improvement, that strength in the face of negativity,
Oh, okay.
and make it part of your own philosophy.
Right.
Because in the end, getting your life right isn't about meeting some standard of success or perfection.
Right.
It's about living a life that's true to yourself, finding what makes you happy on your own terms.
I like that. So what can our listeners do to maybe start getting their life right?
Well, if getting your life right is about focusing on what you can control, what's one small thing you can do today,
Okay.
right now, to move in that direction?
Oh.
What's one action, even a tiny one, that would make you feel a little closer to your best self? Keep that question in mind.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.